What if a single speech spoken in calm, unwavering truth made a president cry, a continent rise, and the world finally stopped pretending not to hear Africa? Jasmine Crockett had only 7 minutes at a global summit, but what she said shook power, rewrote respect, and opened a door no one was ready to walk through. Stay with us, because this is the moment dignity spoke and the world listened. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. It started as just another summit, another grand room in Geneva, polished floors, glossy placards, and diplomatic smiles stretched too thin. The Global Justice and Renewal Summit had all the makings of polite predictability until a woman from the United States was handed the mic and decided not to follow the script. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Clarity, when sharp enough, slices deeper than volume. She stood tall in a deep green blouse, eyes unwavering, and uttered a line that would travel across continents before her speech even ended. I came here today not to speak for Africa, but to remind the world that it was never silent, only ignored. The room stilled. Dozens of representatives froze, mid-sip, mid-scroll, mid-smirk. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, not with apology, not with performance, but with the kind of truth that makes people shift in their seats because it's no longer abstract, it's personal. 5,000 miles away in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré sat in his office, coffee cooling beside him. The screen on his desk flickered with the summit live stream. He hadn't planned to pay close attention. Most of these speeches blurred together, well-worded emptiness. But when Jasmine's voice came through, steady and unshaken, something made him look up. And then she said his name. Not with critique, not with caution, but with reverence. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso has taught us that dignity is not a Western export, it is a birthright. His heart stalled for a second. This was not part of anyone's agenda. She was not quoting from sanitized briefings. She was witnessing, telling the story no one dared frame without condescension. And in doing so, she reached into something even he had buried under duty and silence. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. In that moment, the summit became more than an event. It became an awakening. A leader in West Africa cried, not from grief, but from recognition. And Jasmine Crockett, who had been given 7 minutes to speak, used them to make the world finally stop pretending not to hear. The room held its breath, and history exhaled. The morning had begun far from cameras and conference calls. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, was not in a boardroom rehearsing talking points. He was crouched beside a teenage boy in a dusty lot near Djibo, watching him troubleshoot a solar-powered device designed to alert rural health workers about emergencies without internet access. The boy's name was Sammy, and his idea wasn't backed by a grant, but by scrap metal and stubborn hope. Traoré asked questions like an engineer, not a head of state. And when Sammy grinned, explaining how the device worked off-grid, Traoré placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You are what they fear," he said softly. "Proof we never needed saving." Back at the presidential compound, his protocol officer, Mireille Adjoa, was pacing. The summit livestream had begun. Her voice was composed, but there was urgency behind it. "Sir, they've called roll. Geneva is waiting." Traoré entered the room without haste, still brushing red dust from his jacket. He didn't expect anything meaningful from the call. He'd been on too many like it, well-fed leaders offering handouts with smiles that never touched their eyes. He took his seat, the faces on screen blurred into the usual grid of performative diplomacy. Then something flickered in the corner, a nameplate, Representative Jasmine Crockett. No flashy outfit, no political polish, just poise and focus. There was something in the way she didn't pretend, a stillness that mirrored his own. He remembered too well the rooms where he'd been asked to justify feeding his people instead of paying debt, where local innovations were ignored because they weren't branded, where his refusal to play puppet cost him visibility but protected his soul. His reforms were seen as radical, not rational, his independence a threat, not a victory. But watching Jasmine sit tall before a sea of power, unflinching, he felt something long buried return. She hadn't yet spoken, but Traoré sensed it. This was not going to be a speech, it was going to be a reckoning. And when the camera zoomed closer to her, catching the brief tightening of her jaw, he whispered to himself with a voice barely audible, "She knows." He didn't know how. He only knew she carried something he'd waited years to see reflected. Not sympathy, but understanding. The applause never came. Not because Jasmine Crockett's speech at the summit lacked power, but because it left no room for polite response. It had reached beyond the event, past borders, and into spaces most diplomacy never touches, the soul. Back in Washington, D.C., her office was buzzing. Phones rang incessantly. Emails multiplied faster than her team could read. Some praised her courage. Others accused her of betrayal. One headline read, "Congresswoman sparks firestorm abroad." Another simply called her dangerous. But Jasmine wasn't focused on any of it. She sat quietly in her office, sipping lukewarm coffee, her fingers still wrapped around the handwritten notes she never even used. Her aide, Corey, walked in, tablet in hand. He was younger, often sarcastic, but now his voice carried weight. "You need to see this," he said, placing the screen before her. It wasn't a news clip or a threat. It was a message, direct, from the office of President Ibrahim Traoré. A video call request. Private, immediate. For a moment, Jasmine said nothing. Then she straightened, closed her laptop, and whispered, "Let's do it." When the screen lit up, there was no preamble. No national anthems, just two faces staring at each other from opposite sides of the world. One framed by Capitol Hill, the other by hand-carved bookshelves and natural light in Ouagadougou. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Traoré spoke first, his tone steady but changed. "Congresswoman, your words didn't reach me. They remembered me." Jasmine took a breath. "Mr. President, I didn't come to speak about you. I spoke because you reminded me what leadership looks like when it serves, not performs." Their conversation wasn't political, it was personal. They talked about the fatigue of being reduced to footnotes, of watching brilliance go unseen, of policies shaped without context, and aid wrapped in control. And then the conversation turned toward possibility. What if the truth wasn't just spoken but connected? What if the stories of innovation in Burkina Faso could be shared with youth movements in Brazil, in Laos, in Detroit? What if people across the global south, too long spoken over, had a platform to speak to one another? That was the seed of the People's Bridge Initiative, not a charity, not a political front, a living, breathing network where community-led solutions would travel faster than bureaucracy. a place where the South could speak to the South, across oceans, past walls, without waiting for permission. They didn't have all the answers, but they had clarity. And sometimes that's all revolution needs to begin. The heat in Burkina Faso was thick and steady as Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the tarmac. There was no red carpet, no grand delegation. That was by design. She had asked for no ceremony. "If I'm going to understand this place," she had told her team, "I need to feel the dust under my feet." And so she did. The drive from the airport to the outskirts of the capital passed through markets alive with colour and sound, through neighbourhoods where laughter echoed louder than poverty. Jasmine sat in silence, watching everything. She wasn't here to speak, she was here to listen. Her first visit was to a farming cooperative led by Tene, a woman who had once been a seamstress but became an agro-engineer after her village suffered catastrophic floods. Tene didn't speak with flair, she spoke with certainty. She showed Jasmine a new rice hybrid, engineered to withstand erratic rainfall, grown without pesticides. "This," she said, placing a grain in Jasmine's hand, "feeds our children." We didn't wait for help. We just learned. Later that afternoon, in a small compound built from recycled tires and clay, Jasmine met Rafi, a soft-spoken young man who had once lived on the streets of Ouagadougou. Now he taught music therapy to children traumatized by war. His instruments were handmade. His classroom had no walls, but his students laughed with a fullness Jasmine hadn't heard in months. "Music doesn't fix pain," Rafi told her, tuning a 3-stringed guitar. "It reminds us that we survived it." That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Jasmine hosted something she called a listening garden. No microphones, no press, just chairs and mats arranged in a circle beneath a banyan tree. Anyone could speak. One by one, villagers stood and shared visions, not complaints. Visions. A mechanic wanted to turn broken motorbikes into irrigation pumps. A grandmother dreamed of building a mobile library pulled by donkeys. A teenage girl asked why solar panels were always given, never taught. Jasmine didn't take notes. She let every word root itself inside her. Toward the end, Ibrahim Traoré arrived, unannounced, walking quietly to the back of the circle. He didn't speak. He simply listened. His presence wasn't power. It was witness. When Jasmine finally stood, her voice was low, but full. "Back home, we're told that dignity is given by position, but here, you've shown me something else. Dignity is built, federal, watered, sung, and held." She looked around the circle, then up at the sky. "This is not charity. This is instruction." And no one moved, because everyone knew they were no longer in the shadow of hope. They were standing in its light. The sun dipped low over the painted homes of Tiebele, casting golden shadows across the red clay walls. The final evening of Jasmine Crockett's visit had arrived, but no one called it an ending. Not here. Not after what had been stirred. Beneath the ancient baobab trees, a gathering began to form. Youth, elders, dreamers, farmers. There were no tickets, no programs, no official logos, only intention. Children from nearby villages stepped onto a small, handmade stage, their bare feet silent on the wood. They recited lines from Jasmine's speech, translated into Moor and French. One boy, his voice high and unsure, stood tall and said, "I came not to speak for Africa, but to remind the world it was never silent." The crowd didn't cheer. They listened, because here, listening was sacred. Toward the front, a girl named Salimata approached Jasmine and handed her a small wooden carving, a key etched with vines and suns. "For unlocking the world's ears," she said. Jasmine took it in both hands, overwhelmed not by the gesture, but by the understanding behind it. This wasn't a gift, it was a message. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the stage, he didn't bring a speech. He carried a folded chair and placed it beside the circle. "I don't want a podium," he said. "I want a place among you." Then he paused, his voice dropping to a hush. "This is not about politics, it is about permanence. What we build together must outlive us." He turned toward Jasmine. "When you spoke, you didn't just awaken the world. You reminded us to claim our place in it." He then turned back to the crowd. "We will not ask to be seen. We will build things so luminous the world cannot look away." The crowd stood. Slowly, one by one, hands reached upward, not in protest, but in affirmation. Jasmine stepped forward, placing the wooden key into a jar that would hold the first artifact of the new Voices of Tomorrow Fellowship, a grant to fund grassroots youth-led projects across the continent, chosen not by governments, but by communities themselves. Later that night, as the stars emerged over Tiebele, Jasmine sat with her hands in the soil, feeling the earth that had birthed so much unseen brilliance. "They called it a summit," she whispered to Traoré, seated beside her. "But it was a beginning." He smiled, not as a president, but as a man who understood that the most powerful legacy doesn't echo in marble halls. It settles in the dust when new seeds take root. Jasmine Crockett never intended to shake the world. She simply spoke from the truth that lived in her bones. And yet in 7 minutes, she did what policies, treaties, and headlines had failed to do for decades. She reminded the world to listen. Her words crossed oceans, pierced silence, and touched a man who had led with dignity despite being overlooked for years. Ibrahim Traoré didn't cry because he was weak. He cried because for the first time, someone outside his homeland saw his leadership for what it truly was: principled, people first, and unapologetically African. Their meeting was not diplomatic theater. It was the beginning of a new model for global connection, where power wasn't measured by GDP or influence, but by integrity, by action, by how much a leader walked with, not above, their people. From Tene's climate-smart crops to Rafi's musical healing, from barefoot village stages to a digital initiative that connected grassroots leaders across continents, the story of Jasmine and Traoré is not about two heroes. It's about the millions they gave a voice to. Together they launched more than a movement, they planted a seed. The People's Bridge Initiative wasn't built on funding, it was built on belief. It told young inventors in remote corners of the world that they didn't have to wait to be discovered. They only had to be heard. Jasmine didn't come to lead a revolution, she came to listen to one that was already happening. And Traoré didn't need validation, he needed the world to stop pretending he was invisible. So what's the lesson for all of us? Dignity doesn't require permission. Truth doesn't need translation. In a time when so much of our world is divided by fear, the most radical act you can take is to listen bravely, to believe that someone's value isn't defined by their title, wealth, or proximity to power, but by the work they do quietly, stubbornly, lovingly. In your own life, ask yourself, who have I ignored? Whose story have I dismissed because it didn't look like mine? The world changes when we stop asking who's in charge and start asking who's making a difference. Let's test your memory and your attention to truth. Who initiated the idea for the People's Bridge? Initiative? A. Jasmine Crockett. B. Both Jasmine and President Traoré together. Comment your answer below, A or B, and let's see how closely you followed this incredible journey. Now we want to hear from you. What moment in this story moved you the most? Was it the summit speech, the listening circle under the stars, or the child handing Jasmine a wooden key? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your insight. And if this story sparks something in you, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that shine light where the world once looked away. Let's keep this conversation alive and build the next bridge together.